ultimate adventure is just beginning. William Shatner
Take us out.
is Captain James T. Kirk. Leonard Nimoy is Mr. Spock. DeForest Kelley is Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy. James Doohan is Lieutenant Commander Montgomery Scott. George Takei is Lieutenant Commander Sulu. Majel Barrett is Dr. Christine Chappell. Walter Koenig is Lieutenant Pavel Chekhov. Nichelle Nichols is Lieutenant Commander Uhura. Stephen Collins is Commander Willard Decker. Persis Kambata is Lieutenant Ilia. Star Trek, the motion picture. Gene Roddenberry's production of a Robert Wise film.
I don't think Star Trek really ever had the proper time slot, for one thing.
Yeah. I think it should have been on at 7:30 at night and stayed there. Yeah, but, well, you better slip off.
But it was a very distressing thought, you know, because we knew that we were, when they put us in that 10 o'clock Friday night slot, we knew that was the graveyard slot, and we knew it was on its way out, and we felt all along that we were doing something rather special, that this was a show that should not go off the air, again reflected by our mail, because we were very low in the ratings, but we were breaking every fan mail record in the history of NBC. So the two don't add up. You know, the 1,200 homes that govern you is what puts Star Trek off the air. That's the way it has to be. But we were breaking all kinds of fan mail records. So I was told that
we were very big
in
the 30 cities rating, but not in the nationwide.
Yeah.
In the nationals,
I'd like to suggest something terribly sacrilegious. I believe that, and I'm not privy to any special information, but I believe that the ratings probably did reflect accurately our popularity in terms of the network audience. I think that our followers were passionate, vociferous, and militant, and they were ambulatory. They were ready to go out and picket. They were ready to do anything they could. I think it represented a minority of the viewing public below which you can keep a show on the air. However, and that's the big thing, and that's why I feel safe in saying that. I happen to believe it, but I feel safe in saying it. I think in syndication, we now have the numbers that we would have needed to stay on the air at that time, because we've gone beyond the metropolitan kind of climate. People all over the country are watching the show. The Great Breadbasket, the Bible Belt. You know, science fiction, something that I wasn't particularly familiar with before or was aware of, but science fiction is considered anti-religious, or has been. But with the continual repeating of the shows over and over again, we have picked up an audience all through the country that is diversified, that is not simply children, that is not simply college students, it is really the entire scope of this country.
What you're really saying, Walter, is that when a local station has that program in its vault, it can schedule it at the time it feels it will reach the most responsive audience to it, instead of simply taking it down the line from the television network when the gods of power in New York decide it's going to be on.
Right. But also, you know, when Walter talks about the Bible Belt, just about every Star Trek show was a great morality play also, you know.
Gene wanted to talk. He wanted to find someone intelligent out there to go ahead and talk to. And so he found him. He found the audience, which is something the networks never counted on, that these people could actually, you know, have intelligence. He wanted to be a writer. He wanted to get paid for his writing. He wanted to be able to make a living at doing only that. And the fact that he wanted a chance to put down his ideas on paper. He knew that he couldn't do it in the era that he was in. Censorship was so bad in those days that if he could take things and switch them around a little bit and maybe paint somebody green and perhaps put weird outfits on them and so forth, that he could get some of his ideas across because they wouldn't hit the censors. The censors weren't in those days really scanning every word, I guess. And so he got a lot of ideas through, and that's how Star Trek got born.
We were canceled in '69, spring of '69. And Gene Roddenberry called and said, it's been wonderful working together. Hope we can do it again sometime. Yeah, right. Okay, bye. Never see you again.
When it went off the air, we finally pushed him back on and said, give us a chance in syndication. But we don't have enough in syndication. There's 79 episodes, and you had to have 100. But we went into syndication, which was a smart move on Paramount's part by that time.
When Star Trek was canceled, there was a strong group of fans, a large group of fans and viewers who were terribly upset. And the legend that has grown up about that is that the year Star Trek was canceled was the last year that the networks measured audience simply by numbers. The next year, they started measuring by demographics. And the people at NBC looked at the breakdown of the old ratings of Star Trek and said, boy, if we had known all these young adult males were watching back then, we would have never canceled the show. So it wasn't that a group came into being when Star Trek went into syndication. That group had always been there.
Suddenly it was the perception of them, who they were. They looked at them as a group, and that all-important 18 to 24 and up, that group was represented by Star Trek in surprising numbers.
And they thought, oh, wow, okay, we'll stick it here in the news. It won't get anybody then, and we'll use this up, and it won't be a problem anymore. It's just going to be one of those shows that has lost that much money.
And young adult males weren't too interested in watching the 6 o'clock news, but they were interested in seeing Star Trek, especially since some of the episodes had run as late at 10 o'clock at night. The kids might have missed it when they were 14, but now that they were 16, 17, 18, they could see it.
Well, sure enough, we put it on at 6 o'clock at night, and the kids are home, and Mom's home, and they're doing dishes, or they're just starting to eat, and that did it right there. I mean, the ceiling went up.
They realized that Star Trek was very successful, and the frustration they felt was, we had a shot, we missed it, we have this property that's worth a lot.
And how do we redevelop it, and how do we reconnect?
The earliest mention we can confirm about a Star Trek movie was Gene Roddenberry appearing in the World Science Fiction Convention in Oakland, California.
And that would be 1968, just before Labor Day, that weekend.
Yeah, and so Star Trek was going into its 3rd season, and Gene spoke to an adoring crowd, and he said that he was talking to Paramount about making a feature film version of Star Trek that would tell the story of how Kirk, Spock, and McCoy met at the Academy.
They brought Gene back to Paramount in, I believe, May of 1975. Could be wrong on the date, but somewhere in there, and wanted him to write a feature.
So Gene started working on a Star Trek script called The God Thing, and that's fascinating.
The premise was that the Earth concept of God was completely whacked out, and that the actuality of where it came from was that God was a broken spaceship, a broken robotic spaceship.
Kirk's an admiral, McCoy has retired, and there's a giant object hurtling towards Earth to cause its destruction.
President of Paramount at the time, he didn't like the idea. He was a devout Catholic, and he didn't like the idea that, that we were introducing God in a different way.
There were all sorts of religious issues that ended up being revisited in The Final Frontier, and Paramount, they weren't happy with it.
Why is God angry?
They started a project. It was written by Chris Bryant and
Alan Scott. And they were the screenwriters of Don't Look Now.
And they created a story called Star Trek Planet of Titans. And the idea basically was that the Enterprise ends up going thousands of years in the past and orbiting Earth.
And I believe Kirk is involved in bringing fire.
Yeah, that's it. Kirk and his crew bring fire to the primitive humans living on Earth, and it turns out that, of course, they are the Titans. Kirk is Prometheus. They turned in the script, and Paramount said no, they didn't want to make that one.
And it's the same, we have the gamble with the motion picture where we did 79 episodes. There's got to be one episode in that everybody's going to like, but when you come out with one shot on the movie, you know, not everyone is maybe going to like the movie. But it would be a big question as to whether or not...
Wouldn't you think the movie, though, is almost a pretty well calculated risk? I mean, the audience is built in.
I would think that...
Yeah.
I think everybody believes that that it's, as you say, that it's a pretty well, it's a foregone conclusion. The only problem is that if they decide, because it's a feature film as opposed to a television show, that they have to change the thrust of it in some way, make it monsters and huge battle scenes, something that will, you know, that you can't get on television. You may distort and
transporting it to the big screen and then trying to make it bigger to fit.
Right. You may distort the entire feeling of the show. You may.
I think it needs a storyline, something on the order of the crew encountering Christ in space and finding out that Christ is actually Lucifer. Satan.
I just don't know if we're quite ready for that one yet.
Apparently we're not.
Apparently not.
The movie, the Star Trek movie, right? There have been 967 writers called in on this project. Last word, there was no script. They got a director, they got a start date, no script. I think they're going to stand there and whistle. Who knows? Roddenberry called me in. He says, you know, he was really desperate to call me in, and he said, let's try.
Like you said, you're about to blow a job, huh? Right?
Well, no, Gene knows what I'm going to say. Gene's cool. We came in and we thought up an idea. Paramount keeps saying to them, no matter what plot they offer them, it's not big enough. It's not big enough, right?
That's what he was saying.
Right, except in one of them we destroyed the universe. We thought that was big enough. No, it wasn't big enough. So...
It's like on the news, world ends, details at 10. You know?
How about if we go into space and find Jim Audrey and find out he's God, right? So, anyhow, I have a meeting with a guy from Paramount, the guy who's the liaison. He's the interface between the great powers on the
You know why I held you till after 1:30? You know, a few people go to bed, like Jim Aubrey might be gone now. You know, I don't want you to lose it all when you're on here.
Listen, I must have a suicide complex. I wouldn't be in Hollywood to begin with. We come in for we get a story. It's a super duper story. Gene and I work it out, and it's all solid. So in comes this tum-tum from the head office, and he's gonna listen to it. We explain the whole thing to him. It's complex, but it's fascinating. It goes back to the dawn of time and a parallel species that grew up with humankind and so on and the whole thing. When you get all done, he sits there and he goes, He says, well, you know, I was reading Von Daniken, and, you know, the Mayan calendar is the same as our calendar. Why don't you put in some Mayans? We said, Mayans? He says, yeah, why don't you put in the Mayans? That's terrific. And Gene and I kind of look at each other like, we tried to explain to him there were no Mayans at the dawn of time. He didn't understand that. So he said, well, I'll tell it to Stummy, whatever his name was up in the tower, and that was that.
Ultimately, after several runs at doing a movie, they gave up and threw up their hands and said, you know what, this is a TV show, we should keep it as a TV show, and we're going to start a Paramount network.
And also they were thinking, and it seems like history is repeating itself, the Paramount network was just about to come into being.
Star Trek Phase 2 was going to be the flagship